Dr. Gore's Bedtime Stories, The Enterprise of Death. Blurb on the back. As the witch pyres of the Spanish Inquisition blanket Renaissance Europe in a moral haze, a young African slave is unwilling apprentice to an ancient necromancer. Her tormentor has bound her with a curse forged from blood and spirit. But salvation can lie in arcane writings. Her tutor has hidden it on the war-torn continent.
Ooh.
Okay. Prologue. The worst beginnings imaginable. No corona. Pity Bobadil, King of Grenada, last warlord of the Iberian Peninsula, reduced to a supplicant outside his own city by a Spaniard sovereign, an exile from his home hard won. The truce signed by kings and pope. All that remained was for Bobadil to bow before his victorious adversary and kiss the man's ring. Ooh. The victor was supposed to refuse the offer, thus preserving some shred of Bobadil's already tattered honor. But this stipulation must have slipped the Christian's mind as he extended his pudgy fingers to the Moor. There was nothing for it. King Ferdinand's seal tasted salty as the straight Bobadil would soon cross, and the man's onion pale queen leered at the Moor as he rose. That dreadful Genoan sailor who hung around Isabella like a fly around a chamber pot stood a short distance off. And when they made eye contact, Bobadil supposed the weather-beaten bastard would imagine his head on a pike. At the signing, King Ferdinand had mentioned something about the explorer sailing for India the wrong way round, and Bobadil had paid it no real mind until now. With the scheming seaman appraised for the former rule of Grenada venerable pate, Bobadil hoped he drowned. The handover continued, a grand display of pageantry and pomp, with the humbled Bobadil bowing in all the proper places as the procession carrying aloft a weighty silver cross. All but stuck out their tongues at the defeated Moors leaving the city. Of course, the treaty had many articles detailing how the Moors who chose to stay in Grenada or thereabouts would retain all their rights and be under no pressure to convert and be protected as they had before. And of course, each and every article would be cast down and shattered before Bobadil's moustache gained even a few ashen strands. The Christians had given him a token patch of broken Spanish earth upon which to re-establish his noble person. But Bobadil held no illusions, and so south they departed to sail to a continent Bobadil had never known. Ooh.
Dun dun dun.
But I feel sorry for this guy.
I've missed that ring.
When they came to a prominence upon the road where Bobadil could view the Alhambra of Grenada one final time, history recalls the heavy sigh that escaped his lips, a sigh as weighty as if the whole country issued it. Indeed, it might have. With the passing of Bobadil, the tolerance and culture that the Moors had slowly cultivated over hundreds of years of conquest was likewise expelled, and within Bobadil's lifetime, the Jews and the Moors who had lived at peace with the Spanish Christians would be banished, murdered, or forcibly converted. The lanterns of illumination that mutual respect fosters trade for brands used to burn Korans and witch alike. Small wonder, Bobadil might sigh. A smaller wonder yet still that this most famous of sighs was actually a ragged, choking sob. Oh, this is so cheery.
Beautiful.
Must you cry like women over that which you could not hold as a man? His mother asked him, which predictably only made him weep the harder. She could be unfair, could Bobadil's mother. What a bitch.
Freudian issues incoming.
Bobadil did not simply cry for his lost kingdom. He cried for his lost daughter, the son the Spaniards had kept ransomed during the siege of Grenada had been returned. But in his place, Ferdinand, ever the son of a bitch, had claimed Bobadil's daughter, Iaxa, and there was not a single thing the broken old ruler could do about it. A king should love his sons the most, of course, but Bobadil was no longer king, and so allowed his sorrow to run down his face in snotty dribbles. Oh.
Snotty Reaper.
The viscous golden grief dangling from Bobadil's nose and lips.
That's beautiful.
Right there.
I know. As his belly shook with emotion, made him look for all the world like a walrus chased off a honeycomb by a greedier bear. For Ferdinand's piggy little eyes and boxy jaw lent him something of a ursine face. None present have ever seen a walrus, however, and the only man who had encountered the bear was Bobadil's second cousin, who had been severely mauled by the beast on a hunting expedition.
That's what you get.
The poor fellow had to be carried around in a lidded basket to keep those weak of stomach from fainting at the sight of the gnawed-on stumps where his legs used to be, and the terrible scars crisscrossing his face. The result was that no one commented on the walrus and bear imagery, and Bobadil's second cousin spent the rest of his life haunted by the nightmares of the furry monster that had put him in the box. Poor Bobadil's second cousin.
Oh no. Oh, I do not want to be him.
It's a good party story.
This is truly makes you almost wish for Corona.
I know, right? Oh dear.
Ferdinand, king of this, that, and the other, and now Grenada, was very fond of sexual relations so long as they were not with his wife. It was Isabella's eyes so widely spaced she looked more sardine than woman, and seafood gave him gout.
Oh my god.
That the portly Bobadil had sired such a gorgeous girl as Iaxa pleased Ferdinand greatly, and almost quicker that he felt the pinch in his hose, the lecherous ruler had her baptized, renamed after his wife. A coup to Ferdinand, but a choice that unsettled everyone else. He told about it, and established as a mistress. Behaving in a beastly fashion to Moors was something of a hobby for Ferdinand. And so as Bobadil kissed his ring that fateful January day in 1492, the conquering king murmured in his fallen adversary's ear that were Bobadil to send him a beauty who outshone Iaxa, that the Moor should have his daughter back, thereby ensuring Bobadil knew just what carnal fate awaited his beloved child. The time for pitying poor Bobadil had now passed. Upon emigrating to North Africa and settling in Fez, the still obscenely wealthy Moor did little but acquire pretty young girls in hopes of offering one to his old enemy. He thought his daughter peerless in beauty. However, And as the years passed, and whether or not he would admit it even to himself, his memory faded. He remembered his daughter as being yet prettier and prettier still, until a manifest goddess would have been hard pressed to get an approving nod from the gloomy old
Freudian.
walrus. Yeah, you think?
Is she a bitch as well?
We don't know yet. And so none of the bought women ever made it further than his personal harem. At long last, the would-be royal pimp came into possession of the Egyptian jewel of the local merchant's harem, a girl who caught even Bobadil's rheumy eyes to sparkle and widen. She was little older than the son Isabella, nay Iaxa had been by this time born Ferdinand. But the former king of Grenada saw the potential her beauty hinted at, and so he wheedled and maneuvered and finally managed to get her sent straight to Gibraltar, accompanied by a dozen slaves to tend to her, and 24 eunuchs to guard her, and 36 servants to carry the crates of incense and wine and dates and other presents he included to help persuade Ferdinand to release Iaxa. Do not pity Bobadil, who committed vile sins in the name of fatherly love. When he heard that the ship carrying his nubile gift was sunk by Barbary pirates, he did not believe the herald and had him flayed. And the second one to bring him the same news, he had him burnt alive. And the third he had quartered. And the fourth he had buried alive. But the fifth he believed and was saddened. Having now lost 2 peerless beauties, which should not be possible in the first place, but pity the pedant who told Bobadil that. The former sultan finally gave up on freeing Iaxa, and his sorrow was so pronounced that in his dotage he scarcely enjoyed his prestigious harem, or his sumptuous table, or his magnificent hunts, or his impressive stable, or his pleasure cruises.
What is a pleasure cruise?
Whatever you want it to be.
Uh-huh. As the actress
Playing,
said to
burning,
the bishop.
and rape. Woo!
Yeah.
Oh my!
As for Omrose, the young Egyptian girl Bobadil has sent to exchange for Iaxa, she did indeed fall victim to piracy and shipwreck on the crossing from Ceuta to Spain. Rather than surrendering to the notoriously ruthless corsairs, the ship's captain had sunk his own vessel. Bobadil's incense perfuming and waves as the less suicidal crewmen dumped out the chest to use as rafts. The pirates were able to fish out most of the servants and slaves and eunuchs and sailors to sell into bondage. But a few drowned along with the captain, who had tied himself to the mast to ensure a proud end. Only Omrose and her least favourite slave, Awa, escaped both pirates and sea by dint of a courageous eunuch named Halim. And after a terrifying night at sea with Omrose sitting in a stinking box as the other 2 clung to the sides, all 3 washed up on the coast of Spain. Ooh.
Party.
Omrose was the oldest of the castaways and barely a woman herself, and her sheltered life had made her as skilled at taking charge of calamitous situations as it had at flying through the air. The 2 younger adolescents had weathered much harsher lives, thankfully. and Ambrose deigned to heed their counsel when both Hallam and Auer advised moving inland in search of fresh water. Instead of a stream or spring that they found a gang of bandits who wasted no time in tying their hands and feet. Ambrose,
Oopsie.
I know, right? Ambrose allowed her hands to be tied with a haughty dignity and a poorly concealed relief at being discovered by someone, even if it was only a pack of mangy thieves. Hallam took more umbrage at his mistress being thus detained, and so had his nose broken before finding his own limbs bound. But Auer, who had fled bondage several times on her native continent, only to find herself with a new master whenever she sought shelter, knew well what was she knew well when she was caught, and obediently offered her wrists. Off they went towards Grenada, where the chief of the bandits had a brother who spoke the heathen tongue of the Moors and could appraise the worth of the incomprehensible foreign prisoners. Accordingly, away from the coast and over the plain and mountain they went, into the highest Spanish range to avoid the known roads where servants of King Ferdinand might cheat an honest businessman and his partners of their fairly found booty. Up and up they went, along paths unfit for goats, until they were forced to take shelter from the thunderstorm in a narrow
Mountain
cave.
goats, because damn.
I know, right? None of the three Africans had ever known such chill as the wind whistling down into the damp shelter, their weather-ruined garments small protection, and there in the cold, miserable cave, their nightmare began in earnest.
Oh God, it hasn't begun.
Oh, now they're not.
That was when the nightmare began. So all before that.
It was a prologue. Prologue.
Yeah, that's just a
Nightmare.
prelude.
That was a nice happy dream beforehand.
So what do you think so far?
Yes,
Fucking
Brutal.
depressing.
I love it.
Right,
Yeah,
well, I think it's supposed to get more uplifting now.
Really?
When the nightmare begins. Finally.
Chapter 1. Death and the Artist.
Sounds like Cthulhu Flux.
Funny you should say that. The corpse gaped up at its killer, who squatted over it with a panel of pine steadied on the ruffled velvet covering his thigh, intently sketching the dead man's startled, stupid expression with a nub of charcoal tied to a thin stick. It had taken no small effort to locate this particular body. The first man the artist could be sure he personally had killed in battle. The youth had not died in a manner any would call brave or noble, instead fumbling with his intestines like a clumsy juggler as they fell out of his split belly. And he looked even worse with the grime and blood and filth and the reek of shit and sun-baked offal. But soon he would become a saint. Which saint exactly the artist had yet to determine, but a saint to be sure. It was the least he could do. You're a sick bit of a whore crust, Manuel, said a fellow mercenary as he cut the thumbs off the corpse nearest the one Manuel drew. Say what you will, Werner, said Manuel, scowling down at his handiwork and finding the representation no more pleasing than its model. At least I don't fuck them, you godless piece of shit.
Why? Why would you draw the line there, though?
Something's in his arse, a third man said with a laugh as he strode up behind them and giving Werner a wink. He trotted to the last few feet and kicked Manuel in that very spot. Mean bastard.
Right?
Slipping forward from the blow, Manuel held his sketch aloft as though he had stepped in a creek that proved deeper than it looked. His exposed left knee fell directly onto his subject, and he cursed as the fashionable slit he had cut in the fabric welcomed the warm push of rank meat,
Oh,
guttling now lining his hose.
oh.
He scrambled
Yummy.
up and perused his guffawing assailant. Bernardo and hold on. Bernardo scrambled. That's right. Bernardo and after settling. Oh,
Right, did we get
sorry. My computer was saying something. Here we are. Ah. He scrambled up and pursued his guffawing assailant Bernardo. And after settling matters with that jackass Manuel, he had to go so far as to draw his hand and a half before Werner would surrender the thumbs he had nicked from the artist's kill. By then the light was ruined, a crimson sunset outlining the Lombardy hillside. Manuel trudged toward. The bald stone prominence rearing up into the bloody sky reminded him of a skull with eyes, sockets, and a nose formed from the command pavilions, and the grove of mercenary tents at the base of the mount created a jagged maw. But then he was an artist, so everything looked like a symbol for something else. And because he was also a soldier, most of those symbols we saw made him think of death.
How scary.
I
And
know.
penises.
Manny, my little cowherd. Albrecht von Stein did not stand to greet Manuel, reminded the artist at once why he despised the captain who sat across the obscenely heavy ebony table he insisted be brought from camp to camp with him. Von Stein was a large and hairy man whose blunt face would not have seemed amiss in some turnip field instead of wheedling at foreign courts, and his ogreish manners were little better than his looks. Were the bulk of Manuel's fellow mercenaries not also Swiss, who would testify to his military prowess upon returning to Bern, thereby aiding in his local ambition? The artist would have sought out less odious captains to serve under. Von Stein had followed the scent of bloody metal south, just as surely as Manuel had. However, and the mercenaries of Bern had gravitated to von Stein's service rather than working directly with the French or the various locals, and therefore unstable dukes and mayors. The Lombardy city-states were constantly pouring coin into the trough coffers of the French and imperial commanders, providing the muscle for their squabble when the foreigners were not fighting each other directly, and old Crown Eater didn't have a knack for tactics. Noticing the dishevelled state of Manuel, von Stein pouted in the same fashion as he had at a dinner served several years before, upon realizing the young artist he'd just met was not actually gentry. What a snob.
Oh, yeah.
But you've spoiled your pretty little dress. I think a splash of colour lends it something distinctive, said Manuel, as the flap of the tent fell behind him. Papal paint and all that. Oh, that's good. Good. Von Stein nodded. can't have too many cute names for the wet red, and it's distinctive to be sure. But do you know what the Emperor said about your little hose and silk and all, your baubles and laces? Manuel knew exactly what Emperor Maximilian, former employer and current adversary, has said, because von Stein had already told him thrice on the campaign road. Another hazard of knowing the commander personally before enlisting in the mercenary company. No, what did he say? He said, let them. Von Stein beamed, thrilled as ever to recite the magisterial ruling, as Manuel sweated into his brightly coloured confection of puffed sleeves and tight hose. Swatches of padding and finger cloth stitched jauntily onto the garb by the artist's nimble-fingered niece. About wearing that foppery and all, instead of proper attire, let them, he said. Let them have something nice on their wretched, miserable lives. As if we were hurting for sport or coin down here, where all good men are trampled, as if we were wretched to play at wars other than his. How generous of him, said Manuel. I don't know how men could manage to serve were they lacking in ostrich feathers for their hats. Because everyone needs an ostrich feather for their hats.
Oh yeah, of course.
For all that piss, the plume of your toque is brighter than most. Von Stein frowned. Or do an old soldier's eye mistake your halo for mere millinery accoutrement? I find a handsome presentation best for ingratiating oneself with the enemy. When they turn to fetch me wine and cheese, I run them through. It's quite less than Christian, really. Harsh. Here, let me go to some wine and cheese and then stab them in the back. Yeah, that's not very Christianly at all.
Stabby, stabby.
You give me the impression you don't enjoy the work I pay you for, said the captain, his frown deepening.
Ooh.
A pity when the butcher has no stomach for slaughter, and that's all these little squabbles have been. How's your wife? Well, last I heard. And yours? Well, von Stein narrowed his eyes. Well, Manuel cleared his throat. A very deep subject, but while it's true, I don't relish the slaughter, as you say. I do appreciate the coin. One dead Milanese or Venetian or whoever will buy a lot of paint, the useful sort. And when we return to Bern, I would beg the privilege of having your wife model for me. The powers that be mentioned a possible commission for the cathedral's choir. I make no comment on that one. Oh, von Stein perked up. What sort of painting do you have in mind? Nothing provocative, mind you. My wife is a lady.
No ankles.
No ankles. I haven't decided on the motif yet, said Manuel. She would be Salem, and John the Baptist's head would be as closely modelled on her husband as Manuel dared. She will be delighted, simply delighted, said von Stein. She's been pressing me to ask, but I don't know. I thought it might seem. Manuel was taken aback that von Swine, as he was rather unimaginatively dubbed by his men, had actually demonstrated something resembling decorum. Tell her it is my dearest wish that I hesitated to ask only out of respect for her esteemed husband. Wow, so much respect here.
Oh dear. Oh, this is cheery.
I love how it's written.
Again, yeah. Oh, wonderful. Good, good. Von Stein nodded enthusiastically. And Manuel felt a twinge of self-loathing to put his verbal fingers even the slightest bit under the codpiece of the man's raging ego. So we need to get you home safe to paint, and you don't like this business anyway, so I wouldn't have come if I didn't need the money, said Manuel. And if I had enough to go home, I don't have enough to go home yet, sir. Now you do, said Von Stein, plunking a bag down on the table, a purse closer in size to a saddlebag than a pouch. The captain leaned forward, clearly delighted with his presentation. Manuel waited to see if the man's enjoyment would shrivel if he let it alone long enough. But when the smile did not fade, Manuel sighed and took the bait, reflecting that unless one is quite blonde or white of hair, having teeth that match your beard is a most unfortunate circumstance. The captain's beard was a pepper-flecked auburn. Ew. His teeth were pepper-flecked auburn.
Ew. I thought my teeth were bad.
That's harsh.
Yeah.
A raid at midnight into a fortified city? A one-man assault on a gunner embankment? An assassination? Manuel hefted the bag, poorly concealing the strain it took to lift it. An errand. You deliver something to the Andalusian border, then you can go home. None of that papal dye or what have you, unless complications arise. Brigands on the road, that sort of thing. Spain? Manuel cocked his head at Von Stein. What do I deliver? And how many men do I pick to go with me? 5 men, and I've already picked them. Werner, Manuel cursed. Bernardo, Manuel cursed louder, glowering at the stained knee of his hose. And the Christabel cousins, the 3 that are left. 2. 2, eh? We're down to 2 of the Christabels as of this afternoon, which is still too many. Why do I get the dregs? Are you really asking? We march tomorrow. Manny, you would prefer I give you my best and boldest? Let me take Mo, and you keep the rest. The 2 of us. You would prefer I give you my best and boldest? No, 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 my powder maid stays, and you take the 4. You said 5, so let me choose somebody else. Anyone else to mind my back. Werner and Bernardo aren't too choosy about where their thumbs come from. They're cowards. Nicholas, said Von Stein, the sour expression on Manuel's face as the use of his first name a welcome sight to the captain. They'll listen to you because you're not. Now, along with the packages, I've got a letter for you to deliver. And if I don't receive a letter back confirming that everything went smoothly, you will find yourself in a bit of trouble. Like this isn't trouble already.
Bells.
Right. Manuel
Flags
still
are waving.
I know, right? Right. Manuel still held the satchel aloft. His arms were hurting and he liked it. Spain, what's the delivery? Her. Von Stein nodded behind him at a lump on the floor of the tent that Manuel had hitherto failed to notice amidst the tent's clutter. A faint smile on the old man's lips, lips that looked oily as poached eels in the light of the candle of the desk between them.
Funny.
The lump was shaped like a human sitting with her legs crossed, a thick sack over her body with two bands of chain encircling it, one at the throat and the other at the waist.
You not noticed that on the floor.
Nope, nope. It was cluttered, so she was just cluttering up the place.
Observant abilities -50.
Yep. Manuel dropped the satchel on the table. Get fucked.
Oh dear.
Wow. After all this, he's suddenly grown a conscience.
Yeah.
Where were we? Oh yeah, get fucked. Manuel turned toward the tent flap, his face gone as pale as his most recent model. She's a witch, said von Stein, and Manuel did not need to look at him to know he was still smiling. Of course she is, said Manuel, willing his feet to carry him outside and down to the mercenary tent to wine and food and murder in the morning. Good, honest murder with a crown bonus for each thumb. Spain, of course. I've heard about what they're doing. Have you? Yes. Have you? Manuel turned back to look von Stein in the eye. No, I can imagine, though. Spaniards are evil cunts, as we both know from what's special about her. Those godless bastards don't have enough heretics or mad women to burn. They've got to import ours now. Fuck that and fuck you. Manuel's wife, Katerina, would like that when he told her he knew and that he helped propose and that helped propel him out of the tent. They'll rape her, von Stein called after him, and he saw Manuel's boots pause underneath the flap. I knew you wouldn't do the poor bitch, being as high and mighty as you are. So I wanted you to head it up. But if my work's not to your liking, I'll put Werner in charge and hope. Fuck that and fuck you. Manuel came back in, his lips drawn back like the cadaver of a hanged man. I'll take her. And I suppose you're too saintly to accept payment for the safeguarding the maiden? Von Stein reached for the satchel. Why? Manuel grabbed the man's wrist, surprising both of them. What's she done? There's no such thing as witches. And why in Christ are you talking with her in the room, you cruel bastard? That's fair.
Yeah.
As I said, I don't know what she's done or accused of, von Stein wrenched his arm away, and I don't care. I know a churchman, well, he's an inquisitor now, but you follow. He wants her, he's paid handsomely for her, so he'll have to get her. And in good condition, and in as good a condition as you can manage to deliver. It took my best dog snout to catch her. You know, Wim? Manuel nodded, having seen the former huntsman go into ground that very morning. Before the battle, at the time Manuel had not thought much of it, scouts being even more exposed to the elements than most, and thus more susceptible to all sorts of maladies. They buried him around matins. I'm sure that makes sense. Caught something on the way back, Bonsine sniffed. Fever must have worked his mind before he went. Boy was raving all sorts of horrors. He certainly believed she was a witch, and worse, a black devil, he said. Did he? Manuel peered over the commander's thinning pate at the hooded prisoner and lowered his voice. Don't you worry about her listening. She might, I don't know. Cast a spell, Von Stein smiled. Eavesdrop. We both know that where she's going, they won't listen to a word she says. And even if they did, what of it? We're men of war. Speaking of just that, albeit a spiritual combat. You don't mean you approve of what the Spaniards are doing, or those bastards in Como? It's not just Spain or Lombardy. They're going after them in the Empire, France, and even our precious little confederacy. As I say, I'm not as well read as you regarding just what they're up to, said von Stein. And Manuel saw he wore the same unhappy, fearful expression as when his employers, be they French, Imperial, or whoever he was working for at the time, came to inspect his troops. Rome certainly hadn't condemned it, and I'm nothing if not obedient. Something else you could learn from me. Obedience. But yes, I'm obedient to Rome. So who are we to say if what they're doing in the Lord's work or not? And if the pay is good, the money they're paying if we deliver isn't the issue. It's what we lose if we don't. Our souls, Manuel, our souls.
They're going to hell.
Manuel crossed his arms, trying not to look at the bound witch. Tell a single man and I'll have you hanged, I swear it. Von Stein nibbled his lip. What was promised me, what was promised to all of us when I donated that stallion to the church is in jeopardy. Forgiveness. Forgiveness, Manuel, for everything we've done. They'll take it all away. If I don't deliver the witch, there will be no indulgence, Manny. Manuel's eyes widened and his hand shook. Are you fucking serious? Yes, they mean it too. And of course, the Spanish cardinals are. You actually believe God will forgive your sins if you give the Spaniards a
Just confess and say you're sorry.
No, you
Say
actually,
some Hail Marys.
Not bad.
You actually believe God will forgive your sins if you give the Spaniards a woman to burn? Manuel looked like he was going to be sick as he forced a dry barking laugh. And that story about you trading your horse for blankets, indulgences is true. You really believe the word of pardoners, you sad-eyed old cock. I thought only merchants with more coin than sense bought that claptrap. What I believe is no concern of yours. The fear von Stein had poorly concealed ignited into rage, and his fist tightened as he stared at Manuel. What should concern you is getting that witch to Spain, because if you don't hand me a letter with a certain seal on it, you'll be burned yourself, you little tick. Yes, yes, I see you, Nicholas Manuel Deutsch, tacking a little imperial flourish on your name, clawing your way up here and at your home, ever anxious to have a word with your betters, ever eager to pretend your father's wasn't a fucking peddler. You say you want to get involved in politics, my boy. Loose those lazy breeches, bend over and take your first proper lesson, you mouthy fucking peasant.
oh. Oh, beautiful.
The men glared at each other. Manuel's left eye twitching until the older man finally exhaled, deflating like a sack of wine around a table of good friends. Take her and get out, von Stein ordered. We'll be in Milan playing nanny until the emperor arrives to throw his hired Landeshke against we fine Swiss confederates. Our French employers and whatever their thick Milanese are still about, whatever thick-headed Milanese are still about, you meet us there and give me the letter. I give you the crowns, and then you go home to that nice little house and Gertrist Gustas, or whatever fashionably unpronounceable street you've set up on. Yes? Yes? I don't have a choice, do I? Said Manuel, knowing full well that one always had a choice. No, you're the only one I can trust to deliver her, Manuel, and you can tell your confessor it was my fault. And even if she isn't a real witch and you aren't doing God's work, what's another mortal soul on your tally? I'd wager you've lost track on how many you've killed. Yes? No, said Manuel, finished with lying to von Stein for the night. Not only did he know the exact figure, but he knew all their faces, most sketched from memory, but a few on the field. And if he returned to his workshop in Bern, he would have another 7 saints to add to his pile of planks. He wondered if he could bring himself to sketch the witch. To date, there was a dearth of female martyrs in his collection. Go on then, said von Stein, waving towards the witch. Better you set out tonight and camp some leagues away, lest the rest of the boys get a whiff of her. Hard on them since Paula and the rest of her horse skipped off back to Burgundy. The Inquisitor's name is Ashton Cullott, and he's got men waiting to receive her at the church in Perpignan.
Perpignan.
Perpignan off the Barcelona road. Cullott isn't a Spanish name, said Manuel, but he was looking at the witch. They're all Spaniards to me, said Bonstein. I'm going to lift you up now, Manuel loudly informed the lumpy-bagged woman. We're going to march for a while. She's got a leash round her neck, said Bonstein helpfully, and with a sigh, Manuel untied the tether and fixed it to the chain around her waist instead. Von Stein rolled his eyes, pulled the money satchel back into a small chest under the table, and retrieved a sealed letter. He waited until Manuel had taken the letter and awkwardly led the witch to the tent flap before setting his pistol. A glorified hand cannon on the table next to the sputtering candle. Just as the flap fell behind Manuel, his kid-skin boots visible under the edge, the captain called out a final warning. And if you find yourself imagining it's your wife or little niece under that witch sack, And if you then find yourself imagining that maybe I won't be so cross if tragedy strikes, and the delivery does not transpire for any number of reasonable excuses, then, dear Manny, then I want you to remember, and you will not need to imagine because we both know that it is true, that I want you to remember that I know just where your wife and niece sleep this night and every other.
Oh.
Von Stein smiled and raised his pistol towards the tent flap as it was ripped aside, the touch hole at the base of the weapon hovering beside the candle. Manuel took 3 steps before he noticed the gun, and then the long blade of his sword slowly slunk back into its scabbard as the artist backed out of the tent. Von Stein smiled in the empty, bright pavilion, while outside in the damp night, Manuel futilely tried to stop picturing his wife or his niece under the sackcloth and iron as he led the witch into the darkness.
Oh,
That's good.
love it.
It's really dark.